Okay, so picture a ticking clock. And, I mean, we aren't talking about uh, a metaphorical countdown to some vague policy decision.
Right, no, this is a literal synchronized countdown.
Exactly. A literal countdown to what the President of the United States explicitly described to the entire world as well, a fire and fury scenario.
Yeah, a 48-hour military ultimatum.
Issued directly to Iran. And the clock is just steadily ticking down. You have the entire international community, global markets, millions of civilians.
Yeah.
They're all holding their collective breath,
Watching those remaining hours slip away.
bracing for this massive, potentially region-altering strike.
Yeah.
And then with just like a fraction of the time remaining on the clock, the deadline just vanishes.
It completely evaporates, and the machinery of a modern military strike, I mean, it is staggering to comprehend. Stopping it at the 11th hour is almost more complex than starting it.
Really?
Yeah.
How so?
Well, because you have carrier strike groups positioning, right? You have target packages being locked in by intelligence agencies, airborne refueling logistics are fully mobilized. When an ultimatum of that magnitude is issued, that kinetic energy is already in motion.
The gears are turning.
Exactly. Unplugging that clock doesn't just halt a missile, it sends these massive shockwaves through the entire geopolitical ecosystem.
Which is actually the perfect entry point for what we're doing today. So, welcome to the deep dive. We have a very dense, highly intricate stack of source material to get through today.
We really do.
Yeah, it centers on a detailed transcript from military analyst Daniel Davis's YouTube show. And our mission today is to pull apart this massive, confusing, and frankly, frequently contradictory gap.
Right, the gap between the official political narrative coming out of Washington and the unforgiving military realities on the ground.
And of course, the violently different story being broadcast from Tehran. But before we take another step, we need to lay our cards on the table regarding how we're handling this.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Because we are navigating a minefield of heavily politically charged content today. The source text references active Republican and Democratic figures, major ongoing military actions, and incredibly sensitive international relations.
Very sensitive.
So, as your guides through this material, we are operating with absolute neutrality. I want to make that crystal clear to everyone listening.
Right, we aren't here to take a political side.
Not at all. We aren't endorsing the viewpoints of the original analyst, and we certainly aren't endorsing or condemning, for that matter, the political figures we'll be discussing.
Our sole objective here is to impartially break down the facts, the timelines, the strategic arguments presented in the text, just to help you, the listener, understand the sheer anatomy of this geopolitical crisis.
Exactly. Treating the text as our designated landscape.
Yeah, because doing that allows us to focus entirely on the mechanics of the situation. We're looking at the how and the why behind the rhetoric.
Stripping away the partisan noise.
Right, to examine the structural integrity of the claims being made by both sides.
Okay, so let's get right into the timeline of this evaporating ultimatum, because the disconnect here is just wild. I mean, let's call it the art of the deal disconnect.
That's a good name for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we have this ironclad 48-hour ultimatum. According to the transcript, the deadline for Iran to comply or face total devastation was set to expire at exactly 7:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
7:45 p.m., exactly.
But then at 7:23 a.m. that same morning, so we're talking more than 12 hours before the deadline, President Trump posts on social media.
And completely flips the script.
Completely. He announces he's had, quote, very good and productive conversations over the previous 2 days. He declares they were looking at a complete and total resolution of hostilities in the Middle East.
Which is a massive claim.
Huge.
Yeah.
And based purely on the tenor of those conversations, he instructed the quote-unquote Department of War, which, by the way, is a fascinating sort of archaic phrasing he chose to use to postpone all strikes.
Yeah, that phrasing, Department of War instead of the Department of Defense, that's a deliberate rhetorical choice.
You think it's about projecting strength?
Absolutely. It projects strength, which makes the sudden pivot to a diplomatic delay even more jarring. If we look at the narrative Washington is constructing, Trump is claiming the U.S. and Iran are on the precipice of a complete resolution.
But the most revealing detail is who he credits for this sudden breakthrough, right?
Yes. He specifically points to Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
Real estate guys.
Right. And he states they achieved an agreement on almost all points. Furthermore, Trump's narrative asserts that Iran actually initiated the call.
Wait, Iran called them?
According to the narrative, yes. And they did so because the United States was hours away from completely obliterating a $10 billion electric generating plant.
Okay, honestly, it feels like a movie director yelling cut right before the climax of a blockbuster action sequence, you know?
Just turning to the audience and explaining it all away.
Yeah, casually explaining that the villain just called from a payphone to apologize so we can all go home. It gives you absolute whiplash.
It really does.
1 minute, the narrative is total infrastructure destruction, and the next, it's a neatly tied diplomatic bow. But, okay, let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Kushner and Witkoff, like we said, they are real estate guys. They understand leverage, right? So if Iran's economy is just crumbling under sanctions and the threat of a $10 billion infrastructure loss isn't applying a transactional, high-pressure real estate tactic actually a viable way to force a capitulation?
It sounds plausible on paper, but applying a transactional real estate framework to a zero-sum ideological existential conflict, it fundamentally misreads the adversary.
How so?
Well, in commercial real estate, both parties ultimately want to walk away with a financially viable deal, right? The worst-case scenario is losing money.
Sure.
But in this geopolitical theater, the Iranian regime views its survival and its regional ideological mandate as non-negotiable.
So you can't buy them out?
Exactly. You cannot simply bankrupt an ideological state into surrendering its core identity. But the source material highlights an even more glaring issue with Washington's narrative, and that is the timeline of these supposed concessions.
The timeline is totally messy.
Just days prior to this announcement of a diplomatic breakthrough, the official narrative from Washington was that the war was practically won in a military sense.
Right. The administration's line was that the enemy was wiped out.
Yeah. They were saying leadership was decimated and that phases 1, 2, and 3 of the military operation were essentially in the bag.
So if they were already winning, why the deal?
Well, the text points out a core absurdity in that shifting timeline. Let's rewind to February 26th and 27th. That was the window right before the military invasion officially began on the 28th.
Okay, tracking.
According to the source's analysis of the administration's claims, Iran had reportedly already put massive concessions on the table during talks with those same figures, Kushner and Witkoff, alongside the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araqi.
And we aren't talking about minor trade agreements here either.
Not at all.
The text notes they were supposedly willing to negotiate their support for regional proxy militias and their long-range ballistic missile programs. Which, I mean, those items have been strictly off limits in every negotiation for decades.
Decades. Which creates a massive logical paradox.
Right.
If the United States already had those historic, monumental concessions sitting on the negotiating table on February 26th, why would Washington proceed to launch a full-scale war on the 28th?
Right. You already got what you wanted.
Furthermore, what mechanism of human psychology or international diplomacy would lead anyone to expect that Iran, having just had its territory heavily attacked after offering those concessions, would willingly offer up the exact same deal a week later?
It makes zero sense. It's like if you have the winning lottery ticket in your hand, you don't throw it in the fire, start a brawl, and then expect the other guy to just hand you another winning ticket.
Exactly. The baseline conditions have fundamentally altered.
Which forces us to look across the table. I mean, if Washington is painting this picture of a diplomatic victory lap, we have to look at the view from Tehran to see if they are actually running the same race.
And based on the source material, they're running in the opposite direction.
Completely opposite. The contradiction between Trump claiming almost all points are agreed upon and the direct statements coming from the Iranian side, it's staggering.
The evidence of defiance is systemic across their entire military and political apparatus. Let's examine how the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, responded to the ultimatum regarding their power plants.
They weren't exactly timid.
No. Their spokesman didn't issue a statement of conciliation at all. He publicly outlined a doctrine of immediate asymmetric retaliation.
Yeah, let's detail that retaliation.
First, they stated that if the U.S. carries out its threats, Iran will completely close the Strait of Hormuz and keep it closed until their damaged power plants are fully restored.
And for anyone tracking the global economy, shutting down the Strait of Hormuz isn't just some regional issue.
It's catastrophic.
It chokes off a massive percentage of the world's daily oil supply. But they didn't stop at the shipping lanes, did they?
No, the escalation in their threat matrix was incredibly specific. And the specificity is what makes it a credible doctrine of deterrence.
What were the specific targets?
They explicitly threatened to aggressively target all power plants alongside the energy, information, and communications technology infrastructure of what they termed the Zionist regime.
Right. Israel.
Yes. But even more critically, they threatened to completely destroy any similar companies in the broader Middle East region that have American shareholders.
Okay. Notice the shift in tactics there. I think this is fascinating. They aren't saying they're going to go aircraft carrier to aircraft carrier against the U.S. Navy.
Because they know they lose that conventional fight.
Exactly. They know they'd lose. So instead, they're weaponizing global markets and corporate vulnerability.
Yes.
They are essentially saying, look, if you touch our grid, we will inflict unacceptable economic pain on your civilian and corporate infrastructure. That is not the tone of a government begging for a deal behind closed doors.
Definitely not. And it wasn't just the IRGC making these statements either.
The political wing got involved too.
They were equally aggressive. The text cites an Iranian member of parliament who went public on the exact day Trump announced the delay.
And what did he say?
He literally called the American president's back down cowardly.
Wow.
Yeah, this official asserted the U.S. only halted the strike because it realized Iran had fully transitioned into an existential war footing and would absolutely act on its threats.
So they are claiming victory over the delay.
Right. And to add an additional layer of verification, the source notes a Fox News report confirming that the Iranian government explicitly denied even being in talks with the United States.
Wait, talking to them at all?
Yes, categorically rejecting Trump's claim that they were begging for a resolution.
Okay, so I have to ask you to break this down for us. If two parties are supposedly hammering out an agreement on almost all points in secret, why is one side standing on the roof with a megaphone, calling the other a coward, and threatening to wipe out regional corporate infrastructure?
It's a massive contradiction.
How do you reconcile a supposed secret agreement with public escalated hostility like that?
You reconcile it by understanding the leverage mechanics and the deep-seated historical psychology of the adversary, which the analyst in the text captures very well.
Okay, let's unpack that psychology.
Tehran is operating from an entirely new baseline now. Because the context shifted from a pre-war standoff to an active mid-war conflict, their public demands for negotiations have drastically escalated.
What are they asking for now?
They are now demanding U.S. reparations for the damage already inflicted, a complete U.S. military withdrawal from the entire region, and external security guarantees.
So they aren't offering the concessions from February 26 anymore?
Not at all. They have dramatically raised the price of admission.
Because they absorbed the initial blow.
Exactly. The shock and awe didn't break them, so now the cost of peace goes up.
That makes sense. The analysis points to something fundamental about the Iranian strategic mindset that Washington just seems to be, well, ignoring.
This is a nation whose modern identity was forged in the crucible of the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s.
Right, which was brutal.
An incredibly brutal 8-year conflict featuring trench warfare, chemical weapons, and massive casualties. And the current leadership, they survived that era.
They lived through it.
Yes. They have also endured decades of crippling economic sanctions and more recently sustained covert and overt attacks from Israel through 2024, 2025, and into 2026.
So they are used to the pressure.
They operate on a doctrine of strategic patience and resistance economics, so the assumption that this hardened, ideologically driven state is going to suddenly buckle and capitulate after just 3 or 4 weeks of military pain, it reveals a profound miscalculation of their endurance.
It's like treating a marathon runner like a sprinter.
That's a great way to put it.
You know, you hit them hard out of the gate, expecting them to just collapse a mile in, completely ignoring the fact that they spent 40 years training to run through the pain.
Right. And if a diplomatic deal were truly imminent, standard diplomatic norms dictate that Tehran would maintain strategic silence, right, to avoid derailing the delicate final stages.
Or maybe issue a very cautious statement acknowledging some progress.
Exactly. Escalated, specific public threats and name-calling are the exact opposite of back-channel progress.
So the narrative of a neat diplomatic resolution just simply doesn't survive contact with the available evidence.
It completely falls apart.
And this massive disconnect becomes, frankly, terrifyingly relevant when we transition from political posturing to the specific physical assets both sides are fighting to control.
Yes, the physical assets.
Because the impossibility of securing those assets forces us to look at the glaring contradictions in the intelligence, specifically the nuclear paradox.
This is where it gets really complicated.
We have a situation where the administration is claiming facilities are obliterated, while simultaneously citing a 400-kilogram stockpile of enriched uranium as the justification for the entire conflict.
The gap between political rhetoric and strategic military intelligence here becomes an absolute chasm.
Yeah, the source material outlines a staggering contradiction regarding Iran's nuclear capabilities. On one side of the ledger, you have President Trump publicly declaring that all nuclear weapons-capable facilities have been completely obliterated.
And this isn't just some rally slogan either.
No, the text specifically points to testimony from the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. In June 2025, she testified before the Senate, confirming the intelligence assessment that these facilities were destroyed.
And that there had been absolutely no effort by Iran to resuscitate those programs.
Right. Officially, according to the Director of National Intelligence, the physical infrastructure of the nuclear program has been neutralized.
Neutralized. Yet, in the very same breath, key advisors to the president, specifically Steve Witkoff and Senator Lindsey Graham, are actively citing the existence of a stockpile of roughly 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium.
As an imminent threat.
Yes, they are pointing to this specific stockpile as the acute imminent threat that necessitated the February 28th military invasion.
Okay, we need to pause and look at the logistics being proposed here, because it genuinely borders on the surreal.
It really does.
When Trump was asked by the press how his administration planned to handle this highly enriched uranium if this supposed diplomatic deal goes through, his response was that retrieving it would be, quote, very easy.
Very easy.
His exact quote was, "We're going down and we'll take it ourselves."
Which is just...
I mean, I have to confess, I am completely baffled by the operational mechanics he's visualizing here. Is he picturing, like, a geopolitical Amazon return?
it sounds like it.
Do we just fly a cargo plane in, scan a barcode, put 400 kilograms of weapons-grade material into a crate, and have a delivery driver load it up?
The confusion is entirely warranted because the statement completely ignores the physics, the security, and the strategic reality of what highly enriched uranium represents.
Walk us through the reality of that material.
We need to look at why 60% enrichment matters. It is a highly technical threshold where the effort required to jump from 60% to 90%, which weapons-grade material, is a matter of weeks, not years.
So it's right on the edge.
Right on the edge.
Yeah.
And this material is typically stored in deeply buried, heavily fortified subterranean facilities.
We're talking mountain bunkers.
Yes. And they are guarded by elite units of the IRGC. You don't just quote-unquote go down and take it.
Right.
Moving it requires specialized transport, international oversight, and total control of the surrounding airspace and ground territory.
It requires an entirely secure country, not an active hostile war zone.
Exactly.
But even beyond the physical logistics, it's the strategic value of the material that makes the comments so absurd to me.
Absolutely. That 400 kilograms of reprocessed material is Iran's ultimate leverage. Combined with their ability to disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, it is the only card they hold that forces the international community to take them seriously.
Right. Without it, they have no shield.
The idea that a sovereign adversarial nation currently engaged in an existential war would simply hand over its most valuable, hard-won strategic asset easily to an invading force.
It's fantasy.
It demonstrates a complete failure to understand the fundamental nature of the conflict.
It's a massive oversimplification.
Yeah.
You're treating a problem that requires surgical military precision and, frankly, decades of diplomatic groundwork, like a casual weekend errand.
And this dangerous habit of oversimplifying complex military objectives doesn't stop at the nuclear material.
Where else do we see it?
It extends directly to the operational planning for the troops currently deployed in the theater.
Right.
The failure to secure the nuclear material through this imaginary deal naturally forces the administration to look for alternative ways to cripple the regime.
Which leads us to the proposed operation to choke off their oil supply.
Exactly. This brings us to what the analyst calls the Iwo Jima comparison and the reality of Kharg Island.
The Kharg Island proposal. The analysis of this really exposes how perilous the gap between television rhetoric and actual military doctrine has become.
It's deeply concerning.
The source details a strategy heavily promoted by Senator Lindsey Graham to launch a military capture of Kharg Island. And the strategic objective is straightforward, right?
Seize control of the primary terminal Iran uses to export its oil.
Right, effectively starving the regime of the capital it needs to fund its military and proxies.
The objective makes sense on paper. Cut the purse strings, choke out the regime.
And they are actively mobilizing the assets to do it, which is the crazy part. The text confirms there are 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, or MEUs, in play.
Yes, the USS Tripoli is arriving on station immediately, and the USS Boxer is about 10 to 14 days behind it.
Okay, to understand the capability being deployed, we have to look at what an MEU actually brings to the fight.
These amphibious assault ships operate as localized power projection platforms. They are loaded with advanced F-35 fighter jets, V-22 Osprey tiltrotor aircraft for rapid troop insertion, and a combined force of roughly 5,000 U.S. Marines.
5,000 Marines.
Yeah.
Enforcing entry and capturing contested islands is the literal core competency of the United States Marine Corps.
They are highly trained for this exact profile of mission.
So the troops are extremely capable, and the assets are moving into position.
Yeah.
But the justification being sold to the public is where the analyst really sounds the alarm.
Yes, the historical analogy.
Senator Lindsey Graham went on record directly comparing this proposed operation on Kharg Island to the World War II Battle of Iwo Jima.
He stated, quote, "We did Iwo Jima, we can do this."
Now look, I'm just an avid reader of history. I'm not a military tactician.
Yeah.
But comparing Iwo Jima 1945 to Kharg Island today feels like comparing a fistfight on a deserted, middle-of-nowhere atoll to starting a brawl in your opponent's own living room while their entire heavily armed family watches from the stairs.
That is a very accurate analogy.
It sounds great for a Sunday morning talk show, but the physics of the battlefield are entirely different.
The analyst in the source material, Daniel Davis, clearly finds that historical comparison deeply troubling, and the data backs up your living room analogy perfectly.
Let's run the numbers.
If we break down the historical reality of Iwo Jima versus the modern reality of Kharg Island, the contrast reveals a catastrophic misunderstanding of the tactical environment.
Okay, what are the baseline numbers for Iwo Jima?
In 1945, the United States deployed 70,000 Marines against a dug-in but entirely isolated force of 18,000 Japanese defenders.
70,000 Marines.
And it took 36 days of horrific close-quarters combat to secure the island. The human cost was staggering, nearly 7,000 dead Marines and 20,000 wounded.
So 70,000 Marines deployed for Iwo Jima. And for this proposed Kharg Island operation, the 2 MEUs provide a combined force of roughly 5,000 Marines.
The troop ratio is vastly different, but the most critical divergence is the geography and the concept of isolation.
Right. Iwo Jima was completely cut off.
Yes, it was 721 miles away from the Japanese mainland in Tokyo. The defenders were entirely cut off from resupply or reinforcement. Furthermore, the U.S. military had established absolute, uncontested sea and air supremacy.
The Japanese baby was gone.
Functionally decimated by that stage of the war. They could not project power to defend the island, nor could they strike the U.S. fleet from the mainland.
The Japanese defenders were stranded on an island, literally and metaphorically. But Kharg Island's the exact opposite of isolated.
Kharg Island is located deep inside the Persian Gulf. It is situated only a handful of miles off the Iranian coast. The source explicitly notes it is well within visual range of the mainland.
You can stand on the Iranian shore and physically see the target.
Yes. And regarding the population, the island hosts a civilian workforce of about 10,000 oilfield workers maintaining the petrochemical infrastructure. The exact footprint of the IRGC military presence is unknown, but they are operating under a massive defensive umbrella.
Explain that umbrella.
Because the island is so close to the coast, it sits squarely inside Iran's anti-accessory denial, or A2AD, network.
Meaning the 5,000 Marines wouldn't just be fighting whoever happens to be garrisoned on the island.
Exactly. They would be stepping into a kill box covered by the entire mainland military apparatus.
What specific capabilities does that mainland support bring to bear? I mean, what are they facing?
The tactical environment is saturated. The island is easily covered by standard mainland artillery batteries.
Standard artillery can reach it.
Yes. It is also fully within range of all tiers of Iranian drone warfare, including massive swarms of Shahed 136 kamikaze drones.
Which we've seen used heavily in other conflicts recently.
Right, and most dangerously, it is pre-targeted by their extensive arsenal of short, medium, and long-range ballistic missiles.
Pre-targeted, so they just push a button.
A Marine Expeditionary Unit is a formidable force, but amphibious ships must remain relatively stationary during troop offloads. In the confined littoral waters of the Persian Gulf, those ships, and the Marines on the island, become static targets for a mainland adversary that doesn't even need a navy to strike them.
They could just rain fire from their own backyard.
Exactly.
And the source cites an assessment from the Atlantic that paints a very, very grim picture of what success would actually look like here.
The Atlantic's assessment concluded that while highly trained U.S. troops could likely achieve the initial objective and take the island,
They could take it.
doing so would mean enduring relentless ballistic missile strikes and drone swarms. Furthermore, they would be fighting and trying to hold ground in an environment choked with petrochemical smoke from burning oil storage facilities.
Because the oil facilities would be on fire.
Right. All while struggling to maintain a reliable logistical resupply line under constant fire. The warning was clear. It would result in a grinding war of attrition.
A grinding war of attrition. You bleed resources, you bleed political capital, and you bleed American lives just to hold a burning rock.
It's a terrifying scenario.
The flippant attitude of saying, "We did Iwo Jima, we can do this," treats history like a bumper sticker. It strips away the actual mechanics of how wars are fought and won. Which brings us to a really uncomfortable realization.
Which is?
If the military advice being broadcast by sitting senators and apparently acted upon by the administration is this fundamentally disconnected from the tactical reality of the Persian Gulf, we have to look at who is actually in the room making these decisions.
Yes. Examining the decision-making ecosystem currently surrounding the White House explains almost every contradiction we've unpacked so far.
It's the inner circle.
The most jarring revelation in the source text isn't necessarily who is advising the president, but who has been systematically excluded from the process.
Right. For a kinetic military operation of this scale in the Middle East, standard doctrine dictates that the heavy hitters of the intelligence and military communities would be driving the strategy.
You would expect the director of the CIA, the director of national intelligence, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and specifically the commander of Central Command CENTCOM to be the loudest voices in the room.
And they aren't.
The text indicates that Trump is largely bypassing this traditional military and intelligence brass. Instead, the strategy is being heavily influenced by a very small, non-traditional, tightly knit inner circle.
Who specifically?
The analysis cites real estate developers and businessmen Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff as the primary figures negotiating with the Iranians and advising on the war's progression.
Going back to the real estate guys.
Right. The analyst emphasizes a critical vulnerability here. While these individuals are highly adept at corporate deal-making and possess close personal ties to the president, they lack any formal military operational experience.
And limited exposure to high-stakes international diplomacy involving hostile state actors.
Exactly. It's an echo chamber.
And alongside the real estate developers applying commercial logic to an ideological war, you have politicians applying electoral logic. We already discussed Senator Lindsey Graham championing the Kharg Island invasion. The text also highlights Senator Ted Cruz's involvement.
The source notes a stunning detail regarding Senator Cruz. Over the weekend prior to the ultimatum delay, he publicly bragged that he was the primary voice who talked President Trump into launching the military action in the first place.
Okay, think about the gravity of that for a second. A sitting senator with no military command background is taking credit for convincing the commander-in-chief to initiate a war.
It paints a very concerning picture.
It paints a picture of generational military decisions being driven by business moguls and politicians rather than seasoned tacticians. But why are these specific figures pushing for such extreme measures only to suddenly support a 5-day delay? What are the underlying pressures driving this erratic behavior?
To understand the erratic shifts, we have to look at the immense political and financial cross-currents the administration is trying to navigate. The analysis points directly to the demands of the administration's political base and its most significant financial donors.
Follow the money.
The text specifically names Miriam Adelson and the broader Israel lobby as key drivers. These are highly influential entities that have directed hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign funding to ensure a specific foreign policy alignment.
In politics, hundreds of millions of dollars aren't donated out of sheer goodwill. There is an expectation of a return on investment.
The assessment is that these major financial backers have spent years advocating for a hardline, uncompromising stance against Iran. Their desired outcome is a definitive, crippling military victory that neutralizes the Iranian regime as a regional threat.
So they want the war.
They are not going to be placated by a canceled ultimatum, and they certainly won't accept a murky, half-finished diplomatic compromise that leaves Iran's nuclear and proxy capabilities intact.
So the president is trapped between conflicting domestic demands. His major donors want the war to proceed to a brutal conclusion, but the general voter base is experiencing fatigue.
Yes. The text noted that even commentators on Fox News were beginning to warn the administration that the average voter does not want to be dragged into an endless, grinding war with mounting American casualties in the Middle East.
How does a politician balance the demands of the donors funding the campaign with the fears of the voters needed to win the impending midterm elections?
The administration is attempting to manage the optics, and the most immediate, visceral metric for public optics is the economy. The source highlights a massive, tangible factor behind the sudden decision to announce the diplomatic delay.
The global oil market.
Exactly. Let's look at the mechanics of that. The very moment Trump announced the 48-hour delay and claimed the talks with Iran were highly productive, the global price of oil plummeted.
The geopolitical risk premium just vanished instantly.
The price of Brent crude dropped by $10 a barrel almost immediately upon the announcement.
Which is huge.
Prior to the delay, the fear of a regional war had driven prices up over $100 a barrel. High crude prices translate directly into immediate pain at the gas pump for everyday American consumers.
Right.
By hitting the pause button on the military strike and projecting a narrative of imminent diplomatic success, the administration engineered a highly effective, albeit temporary, economic relief valve.
But the reality of that relief is entirely superficial. He put the crisis on a 5-day snooze button.
That's all it is.
He delayed the strike for 5 days. If no miraculous comprehensive deal materializes by the end of those 5 days, and as we established earlier, Iran's new baseline demands include reparations and full U.S. withdrawal, not capitulation, then the risk premium returns.
Oil is going to spike right back up, likely higher than before.
And both his donor class and his voter base are going to demand a coherent strategy.
The administration is using short-term economic manipulation to mask a long-term strategic deficit. And the analyst in the source material draws a fascinating, deeply psychological historical parallel to explain this behavior.
Oh, the COVID comparison.
Yes. He compares Trump's current rhetoric, claiming this war is practically won, the enemy is finished, and a deal is all but signed to his rhetoric in March 2020 regarding the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic.
I remember the exact press conferences. It was the assertion that the virus would miraculously disappear and the country would be open and packed by Easter.
The parallel is striking. In March 2020, at the absolute inception of the pandemic, when all scientific and medical data indicated cases were just beginning an exponential climb, the president publicly declared that the battle against the invisible enemy was nearing its end.
He set an arbitrary, politically convenient timeline.
Of Easter, for the crisis to be over.
He didn't base that on epidemiological models. He based it on the fact that an ongoing pandemic was politically damaging. He attempted to manifest a victory through the sheer repetition of a preferred narrative, hoping reality would bend to his rhetoric.
And the analyst argues that we are witnessing the exact same psychological and political strategy deployed in the Iran conflict right now.
The administration is claiming the military objectives are finished, that Iranian capabilities are obliterated, and that a historic diplomatic deal is easy.
They are making these claims not because the intelligence or the tactical realities support them.
Because we know from Iran's escalated defiance and the suicidal logistics of Kharg Island that they do not support them.
Right. They are making these claims because a swift, clean, bloodless victory perfectly serves the administration's immediate political timeline ahead of the midterms.
You can manipulate a news cycle and you can temporarily spook the oil markets, but you cannot gaslight a ballistic missile. You cannot use PR spin to safely transport 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium out of a hostile subterranean bunker.
Eventually, the physical reality of the conflict demands a seat at the table.
The structural disconnect we are examining today is incredibly dangerous. The White House is treating a complex, multi-generational geopolitical conflict as a domestic political variable that can be managed with 5-day delays to manipulate the price of a barrel of oil.
But the adversary is fighting an existential war on their own doorstep. Their calculus is not influenced by American midterm elections.
Not at all. So, as we watch this high-wire act unfold in real time, where did this leave you, the listener? Let's synthesize the landscape we've mapped out today.
We started with the visceral tension of a ticking clock and an ultimatum that evaporated into thin air.
We've exposed the massive chasm between Washington's confident claims of an imminent diplomatic victory, guided by real estate tactics rather than military strategy, and the harsh, unyielding realities on the ground.
We examined how those claims of victory collide with the blatant, escalated defiance broadcasting from Tehran. We looked at the psychology of a nation leveraging its history of enduring an 8-year war and its willingness to weaponize global shipping lanes.
We unpacked the terrifying intelligence paradox of an administration claiming a nuclear program is totally obliterated, while simultaneously citing a massive stockpile of enriched uranium as the primary justification for an invasion.
And we saw the acute danger of political leaders deploying historical soundbites as strategy.
Yeah, comparing the isolated, blockaded Battle of Iwo Jima to a proposed amphibious assault on Kharg Island, an operation that would force Marines into a grinding war of attrition under the umbrella of mainland Iranian artillery and drone swarms. It just demonstrates a profound detachment from modern warfare.
The overarching lesson from this deep dive is the absolute necessity of critical consumption. You cannot take initial political statements from any administration at face value during a conflict.
The source material actually points toward the necessary next step in this process, doesn't it?
It does. It mentions an upcoming interview with a Professor Morandi, an academic tightly integrated with the Iranian government.
Seeking out the ground truth directly from the source, rather than relying on the Washington echo chamber.
In any modern geopolitical conflict, verifying official narratives against sources on the ground, or at least sources connected to the opposing side, is the only way to triangulate where the actual truth lies. Relying solely on the narrative crafted by a small circle of political advisors is a recipe for strategic blindness.
Because right now, the domestic echo chamber is telling us the movie's over, the credits are rolling, and the villain has apologized.
Meanwhile, the villain is on international television actively threatening to burn the entire theater to the ground.
Exactly. As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final lingering thought to explore on your own. We've spent an hour discussing the collision of different timelines,
The tension of a 48-hour ultimatum,
the economic manipulation of a 5-day delay,
the looming shadow of the 2-year midterm election cycle.
and the daily reactive fluctuations of the global oil market. So here's the thought. If the massive lethal machinery of the United States military can be revved up to full kinetic speed and then suddenly slammed into park based on perceived personal phone calls, a $10 drop in the price of a barrel of oil, and the anxieties of a domestic political calendar, what happens when that erratic, short-term machinery meets an adversary whose timeline isn't measured in news cycles or election years, but in decades of ideological endurance and historical grievance?
The friction between those two vastly different perceptions of time is the defining danger of this entire crisis.
Until next time, keep questioning the narrative, look for the mechanics beneath the rhetoric, and thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.